Kim Taeyong has reached a point where he can seize a business simply by showing interest. Company owners give him everything he wants. They understand that resistance is futile. He'll take it anyway. The only thing that varies is the timing. Sometimes it happens in a day. Sometimes the process drags on for a week. Those who try to resist him always lose. They lose not only their business, but also their peace of mind, health, and sometimes even their lives. His name inspires such fear that any negotiations become a formality. People prefer to voluntarily surrender their business rather than risk the consequences. His reputation works in lieu of threats. When he enters an office, everyone already knows the outcome of the meeting. He has become an immutable law in the business world. Early in the morning, his black car with tinted windows pulls up in front of a modern private clinic. He chose this location for a reason. It's the city's best maternity hospital, equipped with the latest technology. Taeyong peers at the building through the tinted glass. The facade is finished with expensive materials, revealing thoughtful architecture. Serious money has been invested here. He steps out of the car. His movements are precise and measured. The dark suit fits him perfectly. His face is expressionless. Today, he's taking over this business. Taeyong enters the building. The air is cool, the lighting subdued, the decor luxurious. Everything speaks of the establishment's status. He walks to the head doctor's office, ignoring the surprised looks of the staff. El and Sunho's office is ajar. Taeyong enters without knocking. A man of about 50 at a large oak desk looks up at him. The doctor's hand trembles slightly as he pushes his coffee cup away. "It's time," Taeyong says, taking the chair opposite. His voice is even and calm. Dr. L nods silently. He knows any objections are futile. A folder with the property transfer documents is already on the desk. The process takes no more than 5 minutes. The signatures are in. The deal is done. Taeyong takes the documents. He feels neither joy nor satisfaction. It's just another task accomplished. Another successful asset has come into his possession. Since the clinic is already an established business, he doesn't plan any immediate changes, but he does need to check out how everything works from the inside. First, though, he needs a snack. He deliberately skipped breakfast this morning to avoid delaying the deal. His car heads to a small restaurant on a quiet side street. It's a trusted place. People know him and respect his peace. Taeyong takes his usual table in the corner. The order is simple: omelet, toast, black coffee. He eats slowly but without pause. His thoughts are already in the clinic. When he's finished, he looks at his watch. Time is running out. He hates wasting time on the road. Every minute in his life is precious, and time is money. And money is what he lives for. Not out of greed, no. Money represents power, control, opportunity. It is the measure of his success, proof of his strength. "Speed up," he says curtly to the driver as he gets into the car. The car moves smoothly. Taeyong leans back in the seat, closing his eyes. He mentally runs through the details of his upcoming visit. What does he want to see? How should he act? Should he immediately reveal who the new boss is, or maintain the appearance of being just another visitor for now? The car pulls up to the clinic again. Now, in the daylight, the building looks even more impressive. The sun illuminates the immaculate glass and steel walls, the neatly trimmed bushes at the entrance, and the spacious parking lot. It's immediately obvious that a huge amount of money has been invested in this place. Rumor has it that this is the best hospital in the city, and its exterior fully lives up to that reputation. It's interesting to see what's inside. It's certainly no worse than the outside. Taeyong gets out of the car and heads for the entrance. His gait is confident, his gaze direct. He enters without a hint of doubt or remorse, as if he hadn't just taken over the business from its previous owner a couple of hours ago. For him, it's business as usual, another work task completed efficiently and on time. The lobby is already busier than it was this morning. Nurses are rushing about their business, receptionists are answering phones, and several patients are waiting their turn. Taeyong approaches the reception desk. "Hello?" He addresses the young receptionist. "I'm the new owner of the clinic. I'd like to take a tour of the facility." The girl looks at him in confusion. She clearly hadn't been warned about the change of ownership. "Oh, owner?" she asks again. But Dr. L and Sunho. Dr. L and Sunho are no longer the owner, Taeyong says calmly. As of this morning, the clinic belongs to me. Please don't disturb anyone. I'll just go by and have a look. He doesn't wait for an answer, turns, and heads down the hallway. The administrator watches him go, confused, then grabs the phone, trying to reach management. Taeyeon walks down a long, bright corridor. The walls are painted in calming pastel colors. Neutral paintings hang on the walls, and the floor is covered with a silent, non-slip surface. An atmosphere of calm and professionalism permeates the space. This is exactly what the high-quality clinic should look like. He passes various departments, ultrasound rooms, laboratories, maternity wards. Everything is clean, modern, and functional. He mentally notes the positives. The equipment is in good condition. The layout is well thought out. His attention is drawn to a door at the end of the corridor, the maternity ward. Muffled voices can be heard coming from there. He heads there, wanting to see this part of the clinic as well. As he approaches the delivery room, something unexpected happens. A folded bill falls out of his inside jacket pocket. He bends down to pick it up. At that moment, the door to the delivery room swings open, and a young nurse emerges. She looks nervous and focused. Seeing Taeyong bending over to pick up the money, she immediately jumps to conclusions. "Ah, there you are," she exclaims, grabbing his sleeve. "Finally! Come quickly, your wife is already exhausted. You agreed to call you when the most important moment begins." Taeyong tries to pull his hand away, opening his mouth to explain that she's clearly confused him with someone else, but the nurse is relentless. She drags him toward the door, continuing to hurry. "We've been waiting for you!" The child's father must be involved and support his wife. Now is not the time to be modest. He wants to say he's the wrong person, that there's some mistake here, but the odds are stacked against him. There's a flurry of activity all around. 2 more nurses rush past, rolling some equipment, and the cries of a woman in labor can be heard from the next room. In this confusion, his attempt to explain the situation is drowned out by the general chaos. The nurse, ignoring him, practically pushes him into the room. The air here is thick, smelling of antiseptic and sweat. In the center, on a special bed, lies a woman. Her face is pale, her hair is stuck to her forehead, her clothes are soaked. She is breathing heavily, her eyes closed from pain and effort. When she opens them for a moment, her gaze falls on Taeyong. A moment of bewilderment flashes in her eyes, a faint spark of recognition that this isn't her husband. But then a new wave of pain overwhelms her, and she closes her eyes again, her face contorting into a grimace. She doesn't have the strength to figure this out, to ask questions, to figure out who this strange man in an expensive suit is. She no longer cares about anyone around her. Only pain, only struggle, only the goal of having a child exists. Taeyong finds himself trapped. He can't simply turn around and leave. He's surrounded by a doctor and midwife who perceive him as a lost and confused husband, which, in their experience, is common. "Come to her, take her hand," the midwife says quietly but insistently, pushing him toward the head of the bed. "Support her. This is very important now." Taeyong stands frozen. He, a man accustomed to controlling every situation, finds himself in a situation completely beyond his control. He can't command, can't dictate terms, can't use his power or influence. Other laws apply here. The laws of nature, of life and death. He slowly, almost involuntarily, takes a step forward. His gaze falls on the woman's face, distorted with suffering, yet at the same time filled with incredible strength and determination. Something inside him trembled. Some long-forgotten, deep human part of his being. He hesitantly reaches out and takes her hand. It's damp and cold, and she squeezes his fingers so hard it hurts. But he doesn't pull away. The doctor says something encouraging to the woman. The midwife directs the process. Taeyong stands silently, feeling completely alien and yet strangely involved. He watches this action, the struggle, the pain, the hope, and can't tear his gaze away. His thoughts are jumbled. He imagines where this child's real father must be right now. Surely they kept him out because they treated him like a stranger until he, Taeyong, took his place. He accidentally stole the most important moment in that man's life. True, he's only half to blame. After all, they didn't even ask him who he was. Therefore, he mentally decides, his conscience can remain exactly 50% clear. But this logical conclusion does little to quell the strange sense of responsibility that begins to arise within him toward this unknown woman and her unborn child. He continues to hold her hand, feeling his own muscles clench with each contraction. But at that moment, in that room, amid the sounds of heavy breathing and quiet words of encouragement, Kim Tae-yong, the formidable mafia boss, feels like a normal human being. The screams in the delivery room fade, giving way to a deafening silence that lasts exactly 2 seconds. Then a new sound rings out. Clear, piercing, alive. The newborn's first cry, the midwife quickly delivers the baby, and the doctor is also busy with his own tasks. The nurses begin the standard procedures, cleaning, weighing, taking measurements. Taeyong still stands nearby, his hand numb from the woman's grip. He slowly releases his fingers, taking a step back. The scene he just witnessed leaves him in a strange state, simultaneously devastated and overwhelmed. The woman on the bed, drenched in sweat, her hair disheveled, is breathing heavily. But her eyes are now clear. She looks at him, without looking away. Her gaze changes from hazy and distant to sharp, focused, questioning. "Who are you?" Her voice is hoarse with tension, but firm. She doesn't take her eyes off the unfamiliar man, in an expensive, but now slightly wrinkled suit. Taeyong opens his mouth to answer, but doesn't have time. The woman turns her head, her eyes darting around the room, searching for another person. The one who should have been here. Her husband. He's not here. Her face contorts not with pain, but with mounting anger. "Where's my husband?" Her voice grows louder. "He was supposed to be here. We had a deal. Who is this man?" She points a trembling finger at Taeyong. The doctor and midwife exchange worried glances. The nurse who pushed Taeyong into the room freezes against the wall, her eyes wide with horror. Only now does she realize her mistake. I thought he... She begins to stutter, but the woman interrupts her. "You brought a complete stranger into my room at the most intimate moment of my life," she screams, her voice weakened by childbirth, yet full of the force of fury. "You let him! He held my hand. Where was my husband? What have you done?" Her screams can be heard through the open door of the room into the hallway. A young man, the child's father, stands leaning against the wall in the hallway. He has just returned with a bottle of water, waiting to be called. He hears his wife's screams. He hears her say, "Where is my husband? Who is this man?" His face first expresses bewilderment, then shock, and then rage. He bursts into the room without permission, his eyes darting from his exhausted wife to the unfamiliar man in a suit standing at her bedside. "What's going on here?" His voice booms, drowning out even the quiet cries of a baby being wrapped in a swaddling blanket. "Who are you?" He steps on Taeyong. The atmosphere in the ward, just now filled with relief and joy, becomes tense and explosive. The medical staff freezes in indecision. The woman, still lying on the bed, looks at her husband, and her anger finds a new target. "Where have you been? You were supposed to be here, and instead, there's some stranger here." "They wouldn't let me in," the husband yells back. "I went out for 2 minutes to get some water, and when I came back, they told me to wait." And meanwhile, he turns back to Taeyong, his fists clenching. "What were you doing here?" Taeyong remained silent the entire time, observing. He watched the storm unfold and analyzed it. His initial confusion faded, giving way to a cold, calculating assessment of the situation. This was his clinic, his property, this scandal, this mistake, now his problem. His reputation, his business, was at risk. Angry clients, especially in such an emotional state, were bad for business, very bad. They would tell this story to friends, acquaintances, and it could end up in the press. The name of the clinic he had just acquired would be ruined. He couldn't allow that. He steps forward, his movements calm and confident. He places himself between the couple and the medical staff, taking the center of the conflict. "Congratulations on the birth of your child," he says, his voice, low and commanding, oddly cutting through the din of the argument. Both parents pause for a moment, looking at him. Let me explain everything and correct this unfortunate mistake. A mistake? The husband explodes. You call this a mistake? A stranger took my place in the room. My wife. He can't finish, outraged. I understand your anger, Taeyong says, his tone even but steely. And I take full responsibility for what happened. This clinic is mine as of this morning. The statement hangs in the air. Both doctors and parents look at it with renewed interest. The owner? So young? And so unlike a doctor. Your outrage is completely justified, Taeyong continues, addressing the woman first. You had to endure additional stress at the most crucial moment. And you, he turns to her husband, were deprived of the right to be present at the birth of your child. This is unforgivable. He pauses, letting his words sink in. Therefore, on behalf of the clinic, I want to offer you not just compensation, but a guarantee. From this day forward, all medical services at this facility for you and your child will be absolutely free. Everything, from routine checkups to any complex procedures should they, God forbid, be required. The couple's eyes widen. Their anger hasn't subsided yet, but it's starting to mingle with amazement. They understand the sheer amount of money we're talking about. This is the best and most expensive clinic in the city. Lifetime medical care here costs a fortune. Also, Taeyong continues, seeing that his words are having an effect, I will personally ensure that you have everything you need to care for your newborn. A stroller, a premium car seat, clothes, diapers, everything you might need in the first year. Everything is of the highest quality and safest. He speaks not as someone trying to buy their way out of trouble, but as a master taking responsibility and correcting the flaws of his system. His proposal doesn't sound like a plea for forgiveness. It sounds like an order, a new, undeniable fact of their lives. The young father slowly lowers his clenched fists. He looks at his wife, she looks at him. Their gaze is a seething mixture of residual anger, shock at what they've just heard, and the growing realization that they've just been offered not a discount, but a fortune. Are you serious? The woman asks quietly, her anger giving way to exhaustion and curiosity. Absolutely, Taeyong replies, his gaze unwavering. My reputation is worth more than any amount of money. The mistake was made on my turf, and I'm correcting it. This is how it's done. He takes his notebook and pen out of his jacket's inside pocket. They are simple but expensive items. Leave me your address. Everything I promised will be delivered to you within a week. The man slowly states the address. Taeyong carefully writes it down. His movements are precise, without fuss. The atmosphere in the room changed completely. From explosive rage to stunned, almost awkward silence. The nurses quietly finished their procedures on the baby and handed him over to his mother. The woman took her son in her arms, and her face, contorted with anger, finally softened as she looked at his little face. She looks up at Taeyong again. Thank you, she says quietly. There's no longer the anger in her voice, only weariness and a complex mix of emotions. Her husband nods, still a little stunned. Yes, thank you. But Taeyong's offer was so grand, so generous, that it practically nullified the incident itself, transforming it from a tragedy into a strange, almost comical stroke of good fortune. They leave the clinic an hour later, after doctors have confirmed that the mother and child are fine. A taxi, paid for by the clinic, picks them up. They leave not with a sense of resentment, but with a feeling of mild dissonance and a huge, unexpected relief from the financial burden that has just been lifted. Taeyong watches them drive away from the window in his new office. His face is once again inscrutable. The incident is over. The clients are reassured, more than reassured. But the problem isn't solved. It's systemic. He turns to his new secretary, who's waiting timidly by the door. Gather the entire management team, the head physician, senior nurses, department heads, in the conference room in 15 minutes. Now? The secretary asks again. Right now, Taeyong confirms, his voice brooking no argument. 15 minutes later, the conference room is full. Dr. L and Sunho, still pale and depressed from the morning's events, sit at the head of the table. Beside him are the heads of departments and senior nurses. Tension hangs in the air. Everyone has already heard about the incident in the maternity ward and the generous compensation the new owner has provided. They expect anger, dismissals, and reprimands. Taeyong is the last to enter. He doesn't sit. He walks around the table and stands against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. His gaze slowly sweeps over every face in the room. His gaze is cold, assessing, without a trace of emotion. "There was an incident in the maternity ward today," he begins. His voice is quiet, but every word is clearly audible in the deathly silence of the room. An outsider was allowed into the maternity ward instead of the baby's father. This is a failure of the system, a failure of control, a failure of professionalism. He pauses, letting the words hang in the air. One nurse's mistake led to a scandal that could have destroyed this clinic's reputation. A reputation you've spent years building. A reputation I bought and intend to strengthen. He pushes off from the wall and takes a few steps along the table. "I won't look for someone to blame. The system that allowed this mistake to happen is to blame, and now we will change that system." Everyone looks at him with bated breath. Starting Monday, a new identification system will be introduced in all departments, especially the maternity ward. Each patient will be given an individual bracelet upon admission with their last name, room number, and barcode. Each relative or person authorized to visit will be given a corresponding bracelet of a different color, with the same last name. No one without such a bracelet will be allowed into patients' rooms without my personal permission or the permission of the head physician. He looks at the head nurse of the maternity ward. "Entrance control is your responsibility, no exceptions." "No, oh, I forgot." "Oh, he's the husband." "No, oh, I thought so." "There's a clear procedure. Barcode scanners will be installed at every station. Data will be entered into the system. Understood?" The head nurse, a woman in her 50s with a stern face, nods, her lips pressed tightly together. "Understood." Taeyeon turns his gaze to the head doctor. "Lee Soon-ho-si. Osi. You will work out the details of the procedure and brief all staff by the end of the week. And that is worth more than any money. Is everyone clear?" The room erupts in quiet, obsequious yes and nods. The meeting is over. He turns and leaves the room without waiting for an answer. He said everything he wanted. Nothing unnecessary. No threats, no emotion. Simply a statement of the new rules. Everyone in the room understands. He spoke to the point. This is what's right. This will be safe for everyone. The door closes behind him, and silence falls over the conference room for a few seconds. Then everyone begins to slowly disperse, whispering among themselves. They are shocked, but also feel a strange sense of relief. The new boss is clear, firm, and predictable. He's not looking for scapegoats. He's building a system. And there's a certain brutal justice to this. Taeyong returns to his office. He goes to the window and looks out over the city. His first day of owning a clinic is coming to an end. He acquired an asset, faced a crisis, spent a significant amount of money to resolve it, and began implementing new processes to prevent it from happening again. It was a productive day, nothing personal, just business. But deep inside, in a place he'd long blocked out, something warm and unsettling stirred. The memory of a small, damp hand squeezing his fingers, and the sound of the first cry of a new person coming into this world. He pushes these thoughts aside. They're irrelevant. Money, power, control, that's what matters. Anything else is weakness. He turns away from the window and sits down at the computer. The work continues. Exactly 1 week had passed. 7 days, during which the routine of new motherhood had become a monotonous, exhausting marathon for Jasmine. Nighttime feedings, endless diaper changes, a quiet but demanding cry that seemed to fill the small apartment. 7 days, during which her world, already shaken by the strange birth, had shrunk to the size of a crib and a changing table. She stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, getting ready for her child's routine checkup at the Elite Med Clinic. Her reflection frightened her, a pale, almost translucent face, with dark circles under her eyes standing out sharply. Her eyes themselves were red and puffy, her lids heavy. She had cried all night. Not from pain, but from despair and loneliness that had deepened in the silence of the night, becoming almost tangible. She applied a little foundation, trying to hide the traces of tears, but it only emphasized her exhaustion. Her hands trembled as she wrapped her son, little El and Jin, in a warm blanket. A process that should have been filled with joy was now just another mechanical task on an endless to-do list. The walk to the clinic passed through a fog. She noticed neither the streets nor the people. The baby snored softly in her arms, and that sound was the only thing that reminded her of reality. She entered the familiar building, and the cool, sterile air greeted her like a blow. Everything here exuded order and well-being, so alien to her current state. That very day, Kim Tae-yong was also at the clinic. Not out of sentimental motives or a sudden interest in medicine. It was his second week as owner of Elite Med, and he was conducting a routine audit. He was making his rounds of the departments, checking on the implementation of the new rules, those aforementioned wristbands for patients and visitors. He visited the labs, skimmed drug procurement reports, and chatted with the department heads. His presence was invisible, yet perceptible, like the drop in atmospheric pressure before a thunderstorm. The staff became more focused, their movements more precise, their conversations quieter. It was during one of these rounds, in a long, bright corridor on the second floor, that their paths crossed. Taeyong was leaving the head doctor's office, and Jasmine, clutching a bundle containing her baby, was slowly walking toward the pediatrician's office. He recognized her immediately, not so much by her facial features, which had faded from his memory, but by her general aura, by the way she carried the child, with that special, careful weariness he'd glimpsed. But today, that aura was different, destroyed. He paused, letting her pass, and his analytical mind instantly registered the deviations from the norm. The norm was a tired but happy young mother. This woman was neither happy nor simply tired. She was exhausted beyond measure, devastated. Her shoulders were hunched under an invisible weight, her gaze fixed on the floor, not seeing it. The pallor of her skin was sickly, and her red, puffy eyelids spoke eloquently of recent tears. Lots of tears. Something inside Taeyong, that same cold mechanism of assessing risks and assets, worked differently. He saw before him more than just a former client whose problematic incident he had successfully resolved. He saw living proof of a systemic failure, the consequences of which, it turned out, could be far deeper and more serious than simply a damaged reputation for the clinic. Her appearance was a blatant violation of the order he had sought to establish in his new property. A shattered person within the walls of his perfectly tuned mechanism, he took a step forward. "Excuse me," his voice, usually firm and emotionless, sounded a little softer this time. Jasmine winced and looked up at him. Her gaze was blank, distant. It took a couple of seconds for recognition to flicker in her red eyes. "Ah, hello," she whispered, instinctively hugging the baby tighter. "Are you feeling unwell?" Taeyong asked. The question was simple, almost banal, but asked with such a direct, unadorned tone that it sounded less like politeness and more like a demand for accountability. And this simple question became the last straw that broke the camel's back, the straw that her heart, tormented by loneliness, clutched at. She held on for a week. For a week, she tried to be strong, not to cry in front of the child, not to complain to the wind blowing through the window. For a week, she had no one to talk to, not a single living word of concern, not a single look of sympathy. Her lips trembled, her eyes filled with moisture again. She tried to restrain herself, to look away, to press her lips together tighter, but she couldn't. It was too much for her. Everything is not okay," she blurted out in a strangled, cracked whisper. "Nothing is okay at all." She stood in the middle of the sterile hospital corridor, clutching her only treasure, and wept quietly, no longer able to bear the burden of her grief alone. And before her stood the only person in the last week who had simply asked like a human being. Taeyong didn't move. He didn't try to hug her, comfort her, or touch her. He simply waited, his attentive, penetrating gaze fixed on her. He created a space, safe, neutral, without judgment. And into that space, everything she'd been holding onto for so long poured. My husband and I," she choked on her tears, trying to speak evenly. "After that day, after the birth, we fought constantly. He said I had changed, that the baby cried all the time, that he wasn't getting enough sleep. And yesterday, she closed her eyes and heavy drops rolled down her cheeks. Yesterday he filed for divorce. Me and Lee and Jin. She looked at Taeyong, and her eyes showed not just pain, but an animalistic, panicked fear. I'm alone. I don't have a job. I gave up everything before giving birth. The money I had will soon run out. My parents live in another city, far away. Getting there with a newborn, and I don't want to burden them. They thought I was doing well. And my friends. She smiled bitterly, and it sounded sadder than crying. My friends disappeared somewhere during the pregnancy. Now they don't even call or write. They don't care how we are. No one cares. She exhaled, and with it, it seemed, the last drop of strength drained from her. She stood there, defenseless and broken, her entire life crumbling before her eyes in the space of a single week. And it was all because of that very stress, that very nervous breakdown after giving birth, which had happened because of a mistake at that very clinic, because they had brought a stranger into the room instead of her husband. The chain of cause and effect lined up in his head with crystal, inexorable clarity. Taeyong listened, without interrupting, without making any consoling gestures. His face remained inscrutable, but inside, his mind was working at computer speed. He was hearing more than just a story of personal tragedy. He was hearing a report on the complete destruction of a human asset caused by his company's fault. He, Kim Taeyong, a man who calculated everything several steps ahead, had missed the mark. He hadn't calculated the delayed psychological consequences of that incident. He had corrected the financial and reputational aspects, but had overlooked the human aspect. And now that human aspect stood before him in the form of a crying woman holding a child. A living reproach for his unprofessionalism. Her story wasn't just a complaint, it was a failure of his system. A failure that couldn't be measured in monetary terms, but which demanded immediate and total correction. She was his responsibility. Not out of pity or guilt, but out of a cold, iron sense of duty and consequences. He had created the problem, even if indirectly, and now he had to fix it. Completely. Without a trace. He looked at her, a plan already forming in his head. It was ambitious, radical, but the only correct one in terms of logic and responsibility. She wasn't just waiting to be pitied. She was waiting for a solution. And he would give it to her. Exactly 1 week had passed since Kim Taeyong gifted the young family free medical care and boxes of baby gear. He sat in his office at the clinic, reviewing reports. Things were going well. The new bracelet regulations were working without a hitch. That same morning, Jasmine was getting ready for a routine checkup for Lee and Jin. She struggled to get out of bed. It had been another sleepless night. The baby cried for hours, and she couldn't calm him down. Her husband wasn't answering her calls. Money was running low. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy. She tried to hide the traces of tears with foundation, but it was no use. Her hands shook as she dressed her son. The clinic was crowded. Jasmine walked to the pediatrician's office, clutching her baby to her chest. Suddenly, she saw a familiar figure at the end of the hallway. It was the same man, the clinic owner. He was talking with the head doctor. Taeyong noticed her immediately. He remembered her face, even though he'd only seen it once. But now she looked completely different, broken and lost. He ended the conversation and approached her. She told me about her arguments with her husband, about how he'd left, about her loneliness and lack of money. She spoke quickly, stumbling over herself, constantly apologizing. Taeyong listened silently. When she finished, he looked at her for a few seconds, then at the child. I see, he said finally. From today on, you're not alone. You're moving in with me. Jasmine looked at him with bewilderment. She didn't understand. I have everything you need in my house, he continued. Maids, nannies. Money won't be a problem. You have nothing to worry about. She was silent, unable to find the words. Her thoughts were in disarray. Was this a trap? A joke? But he looked completely serious. I can't accept this, she whispered. We're complete strangers. Why are you— It's my responsibility, he interrupted. That stress in the ward was the beginning of your problems. I'm fixing it. He spoke as if he were discussing a business plan, without emotion, clearly and to the point. "Do you have a choice?" he asked bluntly. Jasmine lowered her head. No, she had no choice. Be left alone with a child and no money? Or accept help from a strange but influential man? "Okay," she said quietly. "I agree." She tried to thank him, to find the right words, but he stopped her with a gesture. "It's not worth it. It costs me nothing to help you, and I don't expect anything from you." He pulled out his phone and gave a few instructions. 15 minutes later, a black car pulled up to the clinic. The driver helped Jasmine with her things. "You'll be staying at my house tonight," Taeyong said. "You'll have your own rooms. Everything you need will be provided." She nodded, still in disbelief. The baby in her arms was snoring quietly. As the car pulled away, Jasmine looked out the window. She was both afraid and relieved. This man was a mystery, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone. Taeyong returned to his office. He felt no particular emotion. He had simply solved another problem, corrected a mistake. Now he could be sure that the woman and the child would be all right. New documents were already lying on his desk, requiring attention. Life went on. Another week passed. 7 days that transformed Jasmine's life from a survival nightmare into a strange, almost surreal dream. She was housed in the east wing of Kim Taeyong's mansion, a complex of rooms with a living room, bedroom, and a separate nursery equipped with everything imaginable for a newborn. Everything was of the highest quality, functional and beautiful, but without any gaudy, ostentatious luxury. The first few days passed in a haze. She woke to silence. Not the oppressive silence of an empty apartment, but the calm, deep silence of a safe place. She wasn't awakened by the neighbors' shouts, the hum of cars, or the crushing sense of loneliness. Instead, there was only the soft chirping of birds outside the window and the soft footsteps of the maids. She had 2 maids at her disposal, who rotated daily, and a professional nanny with a medical background, a woman in her 50s named Lee and Minja, strict but incredibly competent. On the very first day, the nanny gently but firmly took over the care of Lee and Jin at night, allowing Jasmine to get her first good night's sleep in weeks. "You need to recuperate," Elle and Minja said in a tone that brooked no argument. "A healthy mother means a healthy child." And Jasmine slept. She slept for 10 hours straight, her body, exhausted by lack of sleep and stress, finally getting rest. She woke to the smell of freshly prepared breakfast being served in her living room, a nutritious, balanced meal, designed by Taeyong's personal nutritionist. At first, she felt awkward. The servants, the nanny, the cook, all of it was foreign to her. She tried to help, to clean up after herself, but the maids only smiled politely and went about their business. Gradually, her tension began to ease. She wasn't a guest here to be served. She was part of the system, an important, protected part. Taeyong appeared sporadically. He'd have breakfast early in the morning before she got up. Sometimes they'd cross paths in the hallway or the main hall. He'd always ask in the same even tone, "Is everything okay? Do you need anything?" She'd reply, "Everything's fine, thank you." That was the end of their conversation, but she felt his presence. He wasn't spying on her, no, but his influence was felt in everything, in the impeccable work of the staff, in the absolute order that reigned in the house, in the way all her needs were anticipated and met even before she realized them. This care wasn't an emotional manifestation, but the highest form of organizing space and resources around a specific person, herself and her child. He watched. Not openly, not as a stalker, but as a strategist assessing the consequences of his decision. He saw her pallor gradually fade, the wrinkles on her forehead smooth out, a lively glint replaced the frozen terror in her eyes. He saw her laugh for the first time in a long time, playing with Lee and Jin in the garden. The sound, quiet and pure, made him pause for a second at his office window, and he watched the child. At first, out of pure curiosity. This little person was the cause of all this upheaval, but curiosity quickly grew into something else. One evening, he walked into the nursery. Jasmine was gone. She was taking a shower. Nanny Elle and Minja were sitting in a chair reading, and Lee Jin was awake in his crib, staring at his mobile. Taeyong approached. The child stared at him with large, dark eyes, then suddenly smiled. That first unconscious smile of a baby. Something stirred within Taeyong. He, a man who built empires on cold calculation, whose heart seemed protected by a shell of ice and steel, felt a strange warmth. Slowly, almost disbelievingly, he extended a finger. Li Jin grasped it with his tiny hand and squeezed tightly. That weak yet confident grip evoked a surge of something primal, protective. From that day on, he began visiting the nursery regularly, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for half an hour. He simply sat next to her and watched the child sleep, eat, or play. He learned that Li Yijin loved being sung to, even though Taeyong himself never sang. He learned that the child quieted down when he heard her voice. Li Minjia, an observant and wise woman, noticed this change and silently approved of it. She began leaving them alone, citing urgent matters as an excuse. Jasmine saw it too. At first, she was surprised, then touched. She saw this stern, taciturn man sitting on the floor next to her son's rug, patiently fiddling with his rattles. How his usually stern features softened as he looked at the sleeping child. Beyond the boundless gratitude, something else began to grow in her heart, something warm and tender. A week passed. Life had settled into a new, perfect groove. Jasmine no longer considered leaving. The thought of returning to her old, empty apartment, to a life of loneliness and fear, sent a wave of panic through her. There was peace here. There was safety. There was him. One evening, after dinner, which they had casually shared for the first time, silently but without awkwardness, Taeyong returned to his office. He sat down at his desk, but couldn't concentrate on the paperwork. His thoughts were elsewhere. He was thinking about Jasmine, and suddenly, with crystalline, blinding clarity, a thought was born in his head. Not a plan, not a strategy, not a calculation, but a thought, a desire. Simple and immutable, like a law of physics. They should be mine. Officially, forever. He didn't analyze it. He didn't weigh the pros and cons. It was a decision that came from the depths of his being. Bypassing all the usual filters of logic and pragmatism, he rose from his desk. His movements were decisive. He left the office and headed for her wing. Jasmine was sitting in the living room, reading a book. She was wearing a soft dressing gown, her hair loose. She looked peaceful and at home. Yes, at home. Seeing him in the doorway, she looked up in surprise. He didn't usually come in here at this hour. "May I?" he asked, his voice sounding a little deeper than usual. "Of course." She put the book down. He walked in and sat in the chair opposite her. For a few seconds, he simply looked at her silently. Then he spoke, said something she could never have expected. "Marry me," came the words in the silent room. No preamble, no explanation, just a simple statement. Jasmine froze, her brain refusing to process the words. "What?" was all she could squeeze out. "I said, marry me," he repeated. His gaze was direct, honest. There wasn't a shadow of doubt or playfulness in his eyes. "And I will adopt Li and Jin. He will be my legitimate son." She looked at him, her eyes wide, her heart pounding in her chest. "But why?" she whispered. You've done so much for us already. You don't need this. It's necessary," he interrupted firmly. "I want you both to be mine. Completely, legally. I'm perfectly aware of all the consequences, all the obligations. I'm not the kind of person who runs from responsibility." He spoke the words with such cold, steely conviction that they sounded like a vow. And in that moment, she saw the difference. The difference between him and her ex-husband. He had been afraid, fleeing the burden of family, that he had shouldered himself. This man, on the contrary, saw that burden not as a burden, but as a purpose, a calling, the only true path. He didn't speak of love. He spoke of duty, responsibility, and desire. And from his lips, it sounded more honest and reliable than any vows of eternal passion. She searched for the words, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. But these weren't tears of pain or fear, but of relief and a strange, piercing happiness. Yes, I will marry you." He nodded as if this was the only possible continuation of their conversation. Sebastiana si good. Tomorrow my lawyers will handle your divorce and in our marriage papers. It's a matter of one day. And so it happened. His lawyers, well paid and incredibly effective, resolved everything within 24 hours. The divorce from her ex-husband was finalized through a simplified procedure. When he received the lawyer's call, he didn't even object, understanding who he was dealing with. A prenuptial agreement was drawn up, guaranteeing Jasmine, Lee, and Jin complete financial security for life. The next day, they went to the mayor's office. The ceremony was simple and quick. No guests, no elaborate gowns. Jasmine wore a simple but elegant dress. Taeyong wore his usual dark suit. They exchanged rings. He said, "I do," clearly and loudly. She said it quietly but firmly. When they left the building, now husband and wife, he turned to her. "We're a family now," he said. There was no sentimentality in his voice, but there was finality. That very finality that provides support for the rest of one's life. She looked at him, this incredible man, whom fate itself seemed to have sent her in her darkest hour. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. From this day forward, her life and the life of her son would be protected. And that was more than she could ever have imagined. Several months had passed since Jasmine and Kim Taeyeon had married. Their life had taken on a new, calm rhythm. Jasmine had fully immersed herself in her roles as mother and wife, enjoying the security and comfort of marriage. Lee Jin was growing up a strong and healthy child, and Taeyeon spent every free evening with him, which touched Jasmine's heart. One warm summer day, they decided to visit a new, upscale shopping center that had just opened in the city's business district. Taeyong wanted to buy his son a new collection of educational toys, and Jasmine wanted to pick out a few things for the house. They strolled slowly along the marble floors of the mall, surrounded by luxurious display cases. A nanny pushed a stroller with Lee and Jin, who was looking around with interest. At that moment, Jasmine froze. Her face turned white, and her hand instinctively clasped her husband's. Taeyong immediately sensed her tension and followed her gaze. A few meters away, outside a boutique selling expensive watches, stood her ex-husband, Park Jun-ho, and a striking young woman. They were laughing, looking at something in the window, and looked perfectly happy. Jung-ho raised his head, and his gaze met Jasmine's. Surprise flickered across his face for a moment, then a hint of awkwardness, but it quickly faded to indifference. He nodded slightly and returned to his conversation with his companion. For Jasmine, this fleeting contact was enough. All the old wounds suddenly reopened. She recalled the pain of betrayal, the horror of being alone with a newborn child in her arms, the humiliating pleas for help that went unanswered. Her breathing quickened, her palms became clammy. She tried to smile, to pretend everything was fine, but it was useless. Taeyong saw everything. He saw her lips tremble, her eyes dim, her entire body tense. He felt her hand grow cold in his. At that moment, his analytical mind, which always assessed situations in terms of risk and benefit, switched off. It was replaced by something primal, instinctive, the desire to protect his mate and cub from the source of pain. He didn't say a word. He calmly turned to Jasmine gently but firmly, led her in the opposite direction. "Come on, I saw a children's store upstairs," he said in his usual even tone. They ascended the escalator, but the atmosphere was sour. Jasmine remained silent, trying to compose herself. Taeyong was silent too, but his mind was already working on a solution. He saw more than just an ex-husband. He saw a threat to his wife's peace of mind, and therefore to the harmony of his family. This man, by his very existence, by his very presence in this very city, could hurt Jasmine again at any moment. This could not be allowed. Returning home, he went to his office. Jasmine, still pale, went to her room under the pretext of a headache. Taeyong sat down at his computer and sent a short message to his personal assistant, the person who handled sensitive matters. The message was terse. Need complete information on Park Jun-ho, current employment, financial situation, personal connections, urgent. The information arrived a few hours later. Jung-ho worked as a sales manager at a mid-sized company, renting an apartment in a less than prestigious neighborhood. He had small but regular gambling debts. His new partner was the daughter of a small restaurant owner. The situation was precarious, but stable. Taeyong decided to end this stability, but he had to do it gracefully. No violence, no direct threats. Everything had to look like a confluence of unfortunate circumstances, or conversely, an unexpected stroke of luck. He developed a multi-move combination, spread out over time, so as not to arouse suspicion. Step 1. Financial pressure. Through frontmen, Jung-ho's credit card debt was purchased from a collection agency. The new owners of the debt sharply tightened the terms, exerting unprecedented pressure. The calls became constant, the tone threatening. Meanwhile, the amount of the debt was artificially inflated through fines and penalties. Step 2. Professional isolation. Taeyong used his business connections. Jung-ho's boss received a lucrative offer to sell the business to an anonymous buyer. The offer was so good that the company owner couldn't refuse. The new owner, one of Taeyong's trusted partners, carried out a downsizing of the staff. Jung-ho, as one of the highest paid but not key employees, was fired in the first wave of layoffs with minimal severance pay. Step 3. An offer he couldn't refuse. While Jung-ho was scrambling to find a new job and evading debt collectors, a headhunter contacted him. He was offered an excellent position at a large company in Busan, 400 kilometers from their hometown. The salary was significantly higher than his previous one, and the company provided company housing and relocation allowance. It was a lifeline thrown at him at just the right moment. Desperate, cornered by debt and unemployment, Jung-ho eagerly jumped at the offer. His new girlfriend, frightened by the constant calls from debt collectors, urged him to leave and start anew. The entire process took about 3 months. Taeyong observed events from the sidelines without directly intervening. He merely gave instructions and adjusted the plan. One evening at dinner, he casually remarked to Jasmine, "By the way, I heard some interesting news today. That ex of yours, Park Jun-ho, seems to be moving to Busan. He found a good job there." Jasmine looked up at him. Her expression was surprised, and deep in her eyes, there was a faint, barely perceptible shadow of relief. "Really?" she asked quietly. "Have you been meaning to?" Taeyong shrugged, cutting off a piece of meat. "They say he was offered a great position. A coincidence, of course, but a lucky one for him." He looked at her. The tension he'd seen in her shoulders for the past few months had finally gone. She smiled, a genuine, calm smile. "I guess that's how it should be." "I wish him luck," she said, turning the conversation to Elle and Jin, who was struggling to reach the spoon. Taeyong nodded. The mission was accomplished. The threat to his family's well-being was neutralized by a method no one would ever associate with him. It all seemed like a chain of random, albeit unpleasant events, ending with an unexpected happy ending for Jung-ho himself. He looked at his wife, who was laughing as she wiped the porridge from their son's face, and for a moment allowed himself a feeling of deep, silent satisfaction. He wasn't a hero in the classic sense. He was a protector, and he had protected what was his, quietly, effectively, and forever. Several years passed. Lee Jin was already running confidently around the spacious house, calling Taeyong Daddy. And for Taeyong, it wasn't just a word. He was his father in everything but blood. He taught him to ride a bike in the garden, read him bedtime stories, and his heart would swell with a strange, warm pride whenever the child came running to him with any of his little problems. It was this feeling, a deep, instinctive desire to protect, to provide, to create an ideal world for his child, that made Taeyong see the world around him in a completely different light. Previously, his domain had ended with the fence of his mansion. Now the boundaries of his responsibility expanded to encompass the entire neighborhood, the entire city, the entire world in which his son would live. He started small. His own neighborhood, luxurious, upscale, but still part of a larger city with its own problems. Random car thefts, noisy motorcyclists at night, poorly lit park alleys where nannies strolled with their children. One evening, while putting Jin to bed, Taeyong heard a sharp, prolonged honk of a car horn outside. The child shuddered in his sleep. It was a trivial matter, a fleeting sound. But for Taeyong, it was the last straw. His son's world should be quiet, safe, and predictable, just like he had created his own home. The next morning, he summoned his chief assistant, the man who usually dealt with recalcitrant businessmen or pesky competitors. "I have a new mission," Taeyong said, looking out the window at the well-kept streets. "I want our neighborhood to become the safest and most comfortable place in the city, not just for us, for everyone." The assistant, accustomed to unusual assignments, merely nodded. "What exactly do you need, boss?" "Everything," Taeyong replied. "Let's start with the roads. Cars shouldn't honk unless absolutely necessary. It's annoying. Loud exhaust fumes, loud music from cars, that has to go." The assistant made a note. "It will be difficult to monitor every driver." "Not everyone," Taeyong corrected him. "We'll monitor the situation. Post people at all key intersections. Have them maintain order. Politely explain to violators that children live here and value peace. If politeness doesn't help, find other methods. Talk to local auto repair shops. Have them refuse to service cars with non-standard, overly loud exhaust systems. Create unbearable conditions for those who make noise." Then he turned to crime. Petty theft, pickpocketing, hooliganism, all of it was anathema to his new world. He organized a 24-hour patrol of the area with his men. They weren't police. They were a law enforcement agency. They knew every local resident by sight, every nanny, every janitor. Outsiders with dubious intentions simply stopped showing up. They were politely asked to leave. Sometimes, to reinforce the point, they showed photographs of their families or mentioned their addresses. The effect was immediate and 100%. But Taeyong understood that safety wasn't just about the absence of crime. It was about infrastructure. He noticed the playgrounds. They were old, with rusty swings and cracked rubber surfaces. Within a month, all playgrounds within a 10-block radius were completely renovated. New, modern, and safe facilities made from the finest materials. Soft, rubberized surfaces absorb any falls. Surveillance cameras integrated into the lampposts, benichis for parents with phone charging outlets, and an emergency call button for security. He thought about the road to school, which Jin would cross in a couple of years. At his direction, additional safety measures were installed at all pedestrian crossings near educational institutions and kindergartens. New generation speed bumps, almost invisible for smooth movement, but effective. Additional traffic lights with extended green times for pedestrians, and bright markings. He bought several vacant lots and turned them into parks with drinking fountains, free Wi-Fi, and the same impeccable lighting that leaves no dark corners. But his main project was something the average person wouldn't even consider. He created a cordon sanitaire. All businesses in the area were quietly but thoroughly inspected. Bars with dubious reputations, brothels, unregistered massage parlors. One after another, they closed at the request of their owners, who suddenly decided to sell their businesses to anonymous buyers at a very favorable price. In their place, coffee shops, flower shops, bakeries, and bookstores opened. He even negotiated closer cooperation with the local police department. Donations for new equipment and charitable contributions to funds for the families of fallen officers made the area a priority for patrol. 6 months passed. The neighborhood had been transformed. It hadn't just become safer, it had become different. Quiet, well-kept, predictable. The cars drove smoothly, without honking. Children played on the playgrounds until evening. On the shady, young mothers and pensioners walked along the alleys, not afraid of anyone or anything. Jasmine said, smiling one day at dinner, "You know, yesterday, for the first time in years, I forgot my wallet on a park bench. I came back an hour later, and it was still there, as if that's how it should be." Taeyong nodded, pouring her tea. "That's how it should be. That's the custom here now." He looked at Jin, who was diligently eating his porridge, and felt a deep, calm satisfaction. He hadn't changed the entire world, but he had created an ideal, polished microcosm for his son. He had shielded him from the chaos and filth of the big city with a solid, invisible wall of money, influence, and ruthless efficiency. He was a mafia boss who had declared war on the very concept of chance within a radius of several square kilometers. And he had accomplished this mission. For him, it was the most important deal of his life.